What's up, Airsofters? This is the all-new G&G Type 64 AEG. G&G continues to release unique and interesting rifles to the world of airsoft, and this somewhat obscure Japanese battle rifle is no exception. But is it something that you'd want to take onto the battlefield, or is it just a wall hanger? In this video, we're going to find out if it's fire or failure. Drop us a like, and let's get started. The Type 64 was developed in, you guessed it, 1964 for the Japanese Defense Agency by Howa Machinery. It saw use by the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force and the Japanese Coast Guard all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and is still even in use today, despite being mostly replaced by the Howa Type 89 as Japan's standard issue rifle. About 230,000 of these rifles were built before they stopped production in 1988. And funny enough, that's when I was born. I'm not saying that my birth caused the decline of the Type 64 in lieu of the Type 89, but it could be possible. The more cultured viewers might recognize this baby from a manga and anime called Gate. Now, did that have an influence on G&G producing this replica? Maybe. Either way, this thing is unique, and we always welcome more unique options in airsoft, getting us away from the standard old M4 and AK conundrum. The Type 64 is definitely a product of its time. Milled and stamped steel construction and wood furniture, and this replica has that in spades. Very nice attention to detail, the metal is sturdy and the real wood feels real good. It's reasonably heavy at just about 9 pounds, which is just about a pound short of the real rifle. Safe to say it's pretty realistic. It was also never exported to the US, so it's really cool for us US-based airsofters to have an airsoft version available. There are some roll marks on the left side of the receiver with some numbers and kanji that say Type 64 and small arms 7.62 or 7.62, which is the caliber of the real rifle. Then there's the Howa insignia just here, and the one that looks like the cherry blossom, which is most likely a arsenal proof mark. The cherry blossom is a reoccurring symbol in the JGSDF, present on a lot of their patches and uniforms, which I think is really cool. In addition to its somewhat unique looks, the Type 64 also has some pretty non-standard controls. First, the fire selector is only on the right side. You'll need to grasp it, pull it away from the receiver, and then rotate it into position. It's a really odd feature, but it's faithful to the real thing. I actually found that even with gloves on, I was able to kind of wedge my thumb between the receiver and kind of roll the selector to my desired position. Something I'm definitely going to have to practice to be quick at on the airsoft field, or just get used to pulling and rotating with your index and thumb. In any case, it's unique and annoying. Uniquely annoying for this self-admitted M4 user. Thankfully, the magazine is pretty familiar and feels a lot like the mag for an M14 with a similar style lock-up and release, just a tab that you hit with your thumb when you extract the magazine. Interestingly, the stud on the magazine actually faces the rear as opposed to the front like you might be used to with other stamped steel rifle platforms that require you to roll the magazine to lock it in place. A really cool feature of this rifle is that the catch for the front of the magazine is actually spring-loaded inside the mag well. I mean, you can pretty much insert the magazine straight. You don't have to worry about hooking it around a tab or getting that stud locked into place before you roll it in, which I think is a really nice feature. Now, you might have noticed that there's not a single piece of Picatinny anywhere, which, if you're into historical platforms, might be a nice break from all the modern stuff with 1 in a million attachments. On the left side of the receiver, there is a threaded hole for a scope mount. Small note, we tried an optics mount and magazines from another company, but they were all incompatible. So if you want to run an optic, you might have to get extra creative and fashion your own solution. Hopefully, G&G or another company will release compatible accessories in the near future for the Type 64. Moving up to the top here, the sights are folding, which is something that's somewhat uncommon for rifles of this time period. The front sight is non-adjustable. It simply flips up into place. And the rear sight has adjustments for both windage and elevation. And it has very nice clicks when adjusting, so you know exactly where it is even without having to look at the diagram that's on the side and the face. And up here at the front, just underneath the front sight, is your hop-up adjustment. Now, on the real rifle, this rotating knob would allow you to fine-tune your gas port adjustment, but on this replica, it actually turns with a very positive click and allows you to adjust and fine-tune your hop-up. If you pull back on the charging handle, it not only locks your dummy bolt, but also gives you a view of how those adjustments are translated into the hop-up unit. As I roll it, you can see the hop-up unit arm being pushed down by this sliding action. That's really, really cool. And to release the imitation bolt, simply depress this button on the side of the receiver. And since we're talking about the front, underneath the muzzle brake are 14mm threads, because, you know, tracer is life. You might also notice these big honkin' bipod legs. They're kind of hard to miss. Yes, they're semi-permanently attached. No, you cannot remove them without first removing the flash hider and this sleeve. Yes, that means when you put it back together, this little sleeve will just be rattling around. So really, you're better off leaving them on. Honestly, they really don't get in the way when folded, and you still get a great grip around the handguard. And they do provide an advantage while shooting prone. I also like that they're spring-loaded and don't require you to press a button or release to deploy or retract them. Moving to the back, we get a look at the real wood furniture on the Type 64. The wooden pistol grip has some checkering, which is great for grip, but I find the grip itself to be a little chunky and squared off at the front and back. Not such a big deal if you're wearing gloves, but it can be fatiguing to the hand. The wooden stock is comfortable for shouldering at my size with a 13-inch length of pull. A side note, maybe it's just me, but I personally don't find the shoulder rest to be terribly comfortable. The battery compartment is in the stock, hidden underneath the flip-up metal shoulder rest and inside of a trap door. There's enough space in here for a stick-type LiPo battery, but not much else. Figure about the same dimensions as a standard buffer tube battery you might be using in another AEG platform. It's going to give you about the same amount of space as you'd have here. The other thing is that the connector style is small type Tamiya, which is serviceable, and it comes with an automotive fuse, but you know how I just love my Dean style connectors, and I'd love to have seen that been connected or included here. The G&G Type 64 comes in a cardboard box that's had a wood pattern printed all over it. Inside, you'll find everything secured in foam, along with an old-school speed loader and plenty of literature, like a very thorough, full-color, multi-language manual. For disassembly, separating the upper and lower can be done by removing a pin and 2 screws. The whole thing comes apart a bit like an AR. But that's where the similarities end. Because this is a pretty unique design, G&G has had to use some proprietary parts, like the hop-up chamber and the gearbox shell. Luckily, most of the parts you would want to upgrade are standard. G&G has dubbed this gearbox the version 3 Mark I. The gears are 18:1 and have been short-stroked by 3 teeth. Speaking of the cylinder, it has an interesting cutout at the back. Such notches are usually used for preventing the cylinder from rotating in certain systems. The piston has all metal teeth with the second tooth removed, a bearing on the inside, and a standard G&G ported polymer piston head. The cylinder head is proprietary, all brass with a single O-ring. The Type 64 nozzle is polymer with 2 O-rings, is very long, and has an interesting feature. It's larger at the very end than it is in the middle. We think this might be designed for reliable alignment with the barrel while keeping the nozzle light and reducing friction from the top of the hop-up chamber. That's just our assumption though. The tappet plate appears to be standard for a version 3 gearbox, and the motor is a short type version of their excellent Ifrit 25K motor. The spring guide also appears to be standard and has a big bearing for the spring. You might also have noticed that there's no trigger attached to the gearbox, and that's because the trigger and the selector are both part of the lower receiver and interface with the electronic MOSFET and trigger board. This trigger board operates via optics and is programmable with an included remote, which we'll go over once we're outside. Lastly, the gearbox has 8mm sealed bearings and a bit of radiusing and reinforcing around the cylinder window. Generally, version 3 gearboxes aren't as prone to blowing out the front end, so it's got plenty of strength for those looking to upgrade. Before we get into our tests, I wanted to show you guys this. The most unique part of the Type 64 is the fact that it comes with a programming remote. Now, there are a lot of functions to this remote, and if you want all of the different features and functions, make sure you refer to the manual that comes with the Type 64, as it will outline all the different options and settings that are available. But I wanted to show you a couple of them right here on this table. I've got my Type 64 with a 11.1 volt LiPo battery in it, and I've filled a magazine because the Type 64 won't fire without a magazine, and trying to hold up the little lever just to display what I'm talking about could be a little bit difficult. So you want to make your changes without a magazine in or the trigger depressed, and then you'll hear a beep when you make a change, and then you can insert your magazine and test it. So for posterity's sake, in its factory configuration, it functions as normal on semi, single semi shots, and on full auto, fully automatic shots. With that said, let's make a change. Semi only. Now, semi only is a lockout for the full auto portion of the select fire switch. So by pressing semi, we hear a beep. I can insert my magazine. And then when I switch to full auto, I no longer have a full auto option, which for games that require semi-auto only is a great feature. Let's say I wanted to go to a 3-round burst. I could do that as well by pressing the 3-round burst on the menu. Hearing it beep gives me confirmation, reinsert my magazine. Back on full auto gives us 3-round bursts. The same can be said for the 5-round burst if you want that. But not only do we have control over how many BBs get fired at any given time, we also have control over how sensitive the trigger is, and that's accomplished by that optical trigger that's disconnected in some ways from the gearbox itself. It allows us to go from a really close or really sensitive trigger pull on 1 to a really far length of pull on the trigger with number 3. Let me show you. Number 1. Now, selecting number 1 is going to engage the trigger almost immediately as you begin to pull it. Let's put it on semi so you can get a better idea. Now let's go all the way to 3 so you can see how big of a difference it is. By pressing 3, I get confirmation, reinsert my magazine, and then when I pull it, see how much farther the trigger has to be pulled before it engages? Almost all the way to the back of the trigger's throw. If you're looking for ultimate realism, that might be the setting you choose. Now, there are a couple other options here on the remote. Functionality control actually allows you to make the trigger a 2-stage trigger, much like you'd find on a P90, where the initial travel in the trigger, let me see if I can set that up for you. Function and then auto allows me to set up the trigger while on the full auto setting at semi-auto for the first half of the trigger pull, like so, and then by continuing to pull, we'll go to full auto. Now, why you'd need a dual stage trigger on a rifle like this, I don't know. But the fact that they've given you that programmability is really cool. If you want to reset your settings, simply eject your magazine, hit reset, and you're back to the factory settings. Now, one other thing on the remote are the gears at the bottom. Now, you'll want to refer to the manual for this, of course, because it gets a little bit dicey in terms of information, and the manual does a great job of explaining it. But basically, if you wanted to upgrade this and change your gear ratio, they've provided a way for you to set that gear ratio to alter the performance of the rifle to more closely match the ratio that you've chosen to replace the factory one with. That's really cool. Because this is programmable with a remote, know that A, you've got to be pretty close to the rifle to make it work. And B, don't think that you control people by just going to buy a remote and then walking around and programming people's guns. The remote does have to be paired to the specific gearbox that you intend to program it with. Replacements are available, but know that there is a programming sequence to go through to get these two to communicate. That's all covered in the manual. Since we've already discussed a lot of the external features and what makes this a unique platform inside, I thought we'd get right into the tests, starting with our 50-foot test. Now, this is going to give us a great idea of the performance and accuracy at standard engagement distance at most airsoft fields. In order to set up the rifle, I've thrown an 11.1 volt LiPo battery in. I've aligned the hop up, or set the hop up for the flattest trajectory I could. I haven't cleaned the barrel. One other note, as I discussed, getting used to selecting your select fire switch is going to take some getting used to. Like I said, I like the wedge and roll technique. That doesn't work for you, experiment with what does. As you can see, 50 foot, no problem for the Type 64. Great trajectory. The hop up adjusts excellently. I'm really happy with the performance at 50 feet. Let's head out a little farther. Out at the 100-foot mark, I'm noticing a couple things. One, the sights are a bit cumbersome to use, and I think with time I could become more comfortable with them, but I'd really prefer a way to mount an optic to this. Optics are just so useful in airsoft. It's a shame that vintage platforms like this struggle with the ability to mount optics, and I'd really like to see a solution for that. With that said, it's still really comfortable to fire from a standing position, even out at 100 feet. But with these bipods, I'd really like to illustrate how convenient those are to use when shooting longer engagement distances. So let's head to the floor and show you how useful the bipods are. Thanks, Matt. Now that we're down on the ground, we can get a better idea of some of the advantages of the bipod. At first glance, the bipod might seem a little bit cumbersome, but honestly, when it's folded up, it's really out of the way, and you can still get a really nice grip on the handguard without needing to remove them. Once they're deployed though, you really start to see why a bipod is advantageous. When you're standing or sitting or playing airsoft, any slight deviation in the stability of the platform, your body, is going to lead to inaccuracies. And so having a stable platform that supports the muzzle end is going to give you much tighter shots. Deploying the shoulder rest. Now this is what I talked about not finding it all that comfortable because it doesn't lift that high. You really have to get your body underneath the rifle even when you're trying to use the shoulder rest. So I'm going to ditch it. Now then, let's see how well we do at our 100-foot test from prone with the bipod. I think at this point it goes without saying that a more stable platform is going to give you better repeat shots. At this distance, you're not going to notice a huge difference, but as you move farther and farther away, that extra stability is going to pay off in spades. If you want to increase your accuracy, you can always clean your barrel or upgrade to a tighter bore inner barrel, but that's not the only advantage of the bipod. One other nice advantage about the Type 64's bipod is it's able to swivel. In fact, it's able to swivel almost completely flat on either side, which for left and right-handed shooters is advantageous, especially when you need to change your magazine. If anybody's tried to reload a magazine from a bipod that doesn't pivot, changing the mag can be difficult because you've got stuff in the way on the ground. And the ability to roll the rifle over to change your magazine is huge. I particularly like that. Our 50-foot target, obviously all within the A zone. Really nice performance at standard engagement distances. As we move farther away, you're going to start to see your spread grow. That's partially because we're using a 0.25 gram BB and you're going to get a little bit more spread because of wind and outside conditions and things like that. You can of course tighten that grouping by cleaning your barrel more often or going to a tighter bore inner barrel. The big thing here is that of my 10 shots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 were on target while standing. Moving to the bipod, all 10 of my shots not only are in a tighter grouping, but are all on target. So if you are shooting at longer distances, make use of the bipod that's included and you'll get better accuracy. Before we get into our FPS and RPS test, I think it's worth mentioning that numbers aren't everything in airsoft. I mean, if you love the platform, you love the platform. But I will say it'll be really nice if this awesome looking platform performs as well as it looks. And that's going to be a big determination whether this thing is just a wall hanger or whether it's worth using on the field. Same 11.1 in the stock and 2 O's in the magazine. Let's do it. Just above 390 FPS is respectable for a barrel length like this, and it's great for outdoors. Let's try our RPS. I gotta say, 19 rounds per second and just over 400 FPS is a fantastic level of performance for something that really otherwise would be a wall hanger. But I think the accuracy and performance of the gearbox certainly make this a contender to be used on the field instead of just hanging it up and admiring it. Damn. 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 Okay. The reason I keep getting frustrated is because as cool as this looks, we're limited to a 90 round magazine. Now with a magazine this size, I would have expected a little bit more rounds, and you certainly notice that it's only 90 rounds when you're doing a lot of full auto fire. One nice feature is that they've got a switch included on the side of the magazine to allow you to select if the gun stops firing when the magazine is empty, or if you want to be able to continue to dry fire even when the mag runs out. And I like that they've given you the option of either turning that feature on or off. Like I said, a few more rounds would have been really nice. Speaking of things that I might change or improve, there really aren't many. I think the features that they've included are really nice for a vintage airsoft gun. Like I said, many of the controls are something that I'd have to get used to and not necessarily something I'd improve. In fact, the whole rifle feels really robust and sturdily built, and I really appreciate the thought that went into the really nicely laid out gearbox with great internals, plenty of battery storage for our traditional buffer tube style batteries. Other than the magazine needing a bit more capacity, I can't wait to see if someone comes up with an optic option for this, because as cool and as innovative as flip-up irons were for their time, I'm just not very good at using them, and I would love the ability to mount at least some sort of Picatinny or Weaver rail in here to attach an optic like a red dot or something with some zoom. So the question still stands. Is this a plain old wall hanger like most of the other historical airsoft AEGs on the market? Or does the performance and looks of this Type 64 really make it a contender for being used in actual airsoft games? I know I'd take it out, but I want to know what you guys think. Would you use this in a game, or would you hang it up and admire it for its beauty and its sturdy construction? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, make sure you're subscribing to our Facebook, Instagram, and here on YouTube. Click that bell notification icon to be notified when we release our latest video content, like videos featuring the Type 64. As always, make sure you're playing hard, playing safe, and playing responsibly. See you guys later.